All right, let's get started. Let's have a word of prayer. You want to pray for us? Okay.
Heavenly Father, God, thank you for the opportunity that we have to come together. God, that we have teachers like Gary that will prepare lessons and try to teach us, God, and give us the opportunity to teach us from not only what the Bible says, but also his experience with it. God, I'm thankful that we have the opportunity to even be in a presence with you, God, as sinners, that you graciously sent Christ to die for us, God, and Lord, that you gave us something that we could never earn or deserve. God, as we get ready to listen to Gary tonight and do some studying and do some learning, God, Lord, that you clear our hearts and our minds of any worries, God, that we can focus, God, that we can listen intently, God, and Lord, that whatever's presented will seep in, God, take root, and God, that we can learn and grow from it. I ask all these things in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We left off with last week. We've been looking at the practical guidelines about how to follow your convictions, and I want to, I think I have one more, and then two, let's see how many. I have two more, and then I just want to kind of conclude this study, and then we'll start in sort of a new area, new study. This is number 10. We left off with number 9 last week. Always be asking others for their feedback. I use Chris as he's like a sounding board for me. Like I have a study that I'm going to do in this class on the ministry demands excellence. And I've just asked for his input. Just give me your input. Tell me what you would like to hear, things that you would like to see in a course like that or in a study like that, just like 2-3 weeks. And we'll talk about that. That's one of those areas that's really critical to me, excellence in the ministry. This is number 10. It might sound like a strange way to say it, but you got to learn what not to be. And I want to give you three specific areas that every pastor needs to stay away, as far away from as possible, right? To stay away from these areas in your ministry. Stay away from them. Don't stick your hand in the fence where the tigers play, right? Number 1 is that you never want to be a controlling leader. You never want to be a controlling leader. You want to lead, but you do not want to be somebody that lords over your flock. That's I have a whole study on lording over your flock. And that is a no-no. It's a biblical no-no because the scriptures tell us in 1 Peter chapter 5 not to lord over your flock. I know so many pastors, I've met so many pastors over the years that they just felt compelled that their convictions had to control their flock. And I don't feel that way. I have people in my church, I may teach on something, they may not agree with me. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because I'm not trying to control their life. And I don't feel threatened by that. But you never want to confuse controlling others with leading others. You still have to be a leader. You have to take people in the right direction. You have to be discerning as to what you really believe that your church needs, right? Every church has different needs. What may be true down at Jeremy's church or here at Pleasant Hill may be quite different than what we need at our church. I mean, the needs are really, really different. And so you want to be a leader to take your people where you believe that they need to be. That's not always an easy task, trust me, to do that. Some guys I don't even think, there's some people that I think that do not even consider what it is that their church needs. I did a long series, it was 55 weeks. That's really kind of a short series for me. I did a 55-week series on connecting my mind with my life, and but I did it because I felt like there were some strategic needs in our church where people did not know how to think like God thinks. As much teaching as they get, you would think that they did, but they didn't, and I just felt compelled that that was where God wanted me to go, and I think it was a really, really successful study that we had. So here's what I want you to think of. I want you to think of leadership as being about influence rather than control. That's what you ought to write down. When you think of leadership, you could just say it's about influence. It's about influence. It's never about control. Once you get into controlling people, you've lost that. In fact, I don't think if that's one of the things that you feel compelled to do, that you ought to be in the ministry. I just don't believe that you need to be in the ministry if you're going to be a controlling, lording over type of person. I tell people all the time, I said, I will not lord over my flock, but I do believe that I will have an impact on them, that I can have an impact on them. Because I can have influence on them. Just from the simple fact I stand in the pulpit every week, and over a period of time, I think that they appreciate what's being taught. So the more you seek control, the more intimidating that you become. If you've never been to a church that had a pastor that wanted to control everything had to go through him. He didn't like anybody making a decision. He could not give up responsibility. In other words, if he asked you to do something, he not only asked you to do something, but he also would give you directions on how to do it, and give you all of the reasons why you needed to do it his way. So he's not really giving you responsibility. He just needs somebody to do something for him the way that he wants it to be done. If I give Chris responsibility to do something, I'm not going to tell him how to do it. If he wants my input, we'll talk about it at some point in time. We'll communicate and talk and kind of get a jump start on what we may need to do. But I'm not going to tell them. I'm not going to get in there. Once I give that responsibility to him, I'm hands off. I'm going to be hands off, if I can say it that way. I'm not going to control him. I would rather him do it himself under his responsibility and fail than to do it and be successful under my controlling mentality.
And the key word being controlling.
Control. You do not want to be controlling your flock. I'm going to say it a different way. You cannot control your flock. And I would say that God forbids it. All right? So, in 1 Peter 5. Number 2, you never want to be a leader who's always criticizing others. You never want to be a leader who's always criticizing others. Affirming your people is so much better than criticizing them. In the last series that I did, I don't think the people that I had in mind even knew that I was talking about them. I didn't want them to, because all during the series I would continue to affirm everybody, really. It wasn't just, it was like, I just kept affirming people and being positive about what we were talking about rather than being negative. But the worst thing that you can do, I'm just going to say this, the worst thing that you can do is to criticize somebody behind the pulpit in a public way. You cannot that's sort of a blasphemous sin in the pulpit to do that. It's not a sin of blasphemy, but it's just that's a no-no. You don't mention names. You don't call people out in the church. I just I have no respect for anybody that would do that. That's using the pulpit as a billy stick or a bully stick, whatever you call it there. You know, one of those billy sticks that people carry around with them sometimes. So once you begin criticizing people, what you will do is you would begin to blame them for the things that you did not get done the way that you wanted them done. And that ties right back into the first one about controlling them. Let them fail. Let them fail. I've said this many times in all of the classes that I have learned much more through my failures than I have through my success. And I would rather somebody give me the opportunity to do something and to fail at it than have somebody over my shoulder all the time. When I was working at the Savannah River site, I had this upper level manager. I was an upper level manager, but he was over me. And I could never leave to come home. Every night he knew what time that I left, and he had to just have his fingers in everything that I was doing. And I wanted to say to him, listen, if you don't think that I'm qualified to do what you've asked me to do, why don't you get somebody else? Because I'm really tired of you looking over my shoulder all the time. My projects are going well. We're not over budget, behind schedule on anything. The engineering's being checked, whatever it may have been. But he had to be there. He spent, it was like he just wasted my time trying, and I didn't want to work for him. You know, I got to a place I just didn't want to work for him. Because he was always trying to be so controlling about everything. He wanted to have his fingers in everything. And I think what will happen if you do that, if you do what he did, if you begin to blame people for things that don't get done necessarily the way that you want them to get done, it will actually destroy your leadership rather than strengthen it. You may get it done right, but you lose your leadership. Everybody understand what I'm saying here? This is real life. This is the way that it works in the ministry. Number 3. This is number 3 under number 10. This really should be ABC, I'm sorry. You never want to be a leader who avoids his God-given responsibilities. You never want to be a leader who avoids, that's the key word, avoids his God-given responsibilities. There are a lot of people, because there's so many things to do in their ministry, there are a lot of pastors that never do what God really wants them to do. I think that primarily that you ought to get yourself to the study of the Word and prayer. That's what I believe. Okay, that's my opinion. I don't generally develop doctrine out of historical narratives like Acts, but I still think that that was a good picture of what took place in the early church. And you and I are men that God has called to study to show ourselves approved, workmen that need not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. Before everybody got here, Robbie and I were talking about just how he had looked at a parable of the prodigal son. Is that in Luke or is it in Matt? It's in Luke, about the prodigal son. And he was telling me some stuff that he had taught because of the conjunction that joined the other parables with this one. Is that what you said?
The way the chapter starts is a historical narrative, and there's a subjunctive conjunction, so, and depending on which version you read in the English, and it says, so Jesus spoke to them saying this. And so what we're talking about was how when you see that and you understand what a subjunctive conjunction is, I hate that combo, you realize that when Jesus started talking through all 3 of those parables, it was specifically because of the actions or words of the Pharisees and the scribes of what was taking place. Yeah.
So the question that came up was, who's that parable about in the parable of the prodigal son? And the answer is it's about the elder brother. It's not about the prodigal son, even though he appears to be the main character, you know. It's about them. It's about the Pharisees. That's who he was talking about. And most all the commentaries, good commentaries, that's the answer that you're going to get when you do an exegesis on that. So that just takes, I've heard so many stories on the prodigal son. I probably preached on it and gave the wrong answer early on in my life. But that's one of the areas where you have to study to make sure that you come up with the correct exposition of a passage so that you can teach it correctly. I'll never forget one time that a guy by the name of, he was the pastor of the largest church in America, a Baptist church in America, and he came to our church to do a revival, and he did a message on the wheat and the tares, and it just seemed wonderful at the time. You know, they had about 25 people that came down, and I really, you know, half of them got saved, I believe, and it was kind of an impactful message, and he was a very powerful speaker. Do you remember his name? Bailey Smith. Bailey Smith was his, and he was out in Oklahoma City, I think. But later on, when I really went back and studied the passage, he completely missed the point of it. I mean, God can still use you even when you don't have the exposition right sometimes, but it was a message that I'm sure he had taught many, many times, but the exposition of it was clearly wrong in the case of what he had actually taught. So the guy that we're talking about here is the pastor who never wants to be involved in ministry. Right? He really doesn't want to be involved in ministry. What he wants to do, and I want to say this, I sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth or not, he wants to shut his door in his study. There was a pastor in a large church in Aiken that, when he'd get to work, he would, every once in a while, he'd have a staff meeting, he'd bring everybody into his office and tell them what he wanted them to do. That's kind of it. There wasn't a lot of discussion, you know, that's what we want. And, but on a normal day, he would get there to work and he would close his door. And he just didn't want to be disturbed. And I don't think it was because he was studying so much. I really don't. I don't know what he was doing, but I don't think it was because he was such a great Bible expositor, if you ever listened to him. So some guys, all they want to do is just stay in their study and just teach and preach. And you have to appreciate that every church, we talked about this all the way through this, is that every church has problems. Every good church has problems. Because you have problematic people. And you
have people.
That's right. Yeah.
We don't need the extra adjective.
That's right. You don't need any help. You know, you have problematic people. You have problems. They just all sort of go together. And you have issues that need to be resolved. And a leader has, when the issues need to be resolved, the leader has to be a part of that. You don't just delegate that off to somebody else. We have a team in our church. I mean, we just had Chris probably could tell you more about it than I could, but we've had, and I'm the fault. I'm the person that did the bad thing. We have a copyright issue where I copied something when I was in Indonesia, and I got back and I was showing my church all the traffic. Indonesia in Jakarta has the absolute worst traffic in the world. We were at one place where they had, I'm not kidding, they had like 15 lanes that got reduced to 3 so that you could get through to get on to the road. You can imagine what that would be like. I mean, it was chaos. It took us almost 4 hours to get from the airport to the hotel. And it was only about 5 miles away. It's just the most ridiculous. And so I found a picture of that. I mean, I actually found a picture probably where we were. And, you know, this was, how long ago was that, everybody? I mean, when was the last time I went to Indonesia? It was probably
4 or 5 years ago.
Oh, I think it might have been 5 years ago, something like that. And we get a letter from some lawyer in California that's representing somebody else in Canada for a firm in France. And they say, send us a check for $250, everything will be okay. We said, we're not paying that. We didn't tell them that, we just never responded to it.
Should have told them that they needed to fly you out there for a conference.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen. And so then we get another letter saying, well, now you owe us, because you've been such bad people, you owe us $1,500 or something. And we said, well, we're gonna ignore that too. You know, and then they send another threatening letter out and say, hey, if you don't pay attention to what we're telling you, you could be sued for up to $30,000 for infringement of this copyright laws. So by that time, we decided that we would go get our own lawyer. Chris took everything. We met as a team, consulted as to what we needed to do.
A couple of times.
Yeah, several times, and everybody read the letters. Everybody was in agreement. One of the elders went out and did the research on this people and said it's a scam. You know, it's a scam. And so we finally got the lawyer involved. Tell them what the lawyer said.
You know, with an attorney that Tracy knows, and he said, first off, this is just a scam, but it's fair use, so there's no issue here, because Google put it out there, it was pulled off Google, no money was made off of it. Beyond that, they're practicing law in South Carolina without being licensed to practice law in South Carolina, so they have a problem there. And then beyond that, they're violating legal ethics laws by sending threatening letters, threatening you in written correspondence. This is a problem, so just ignore them, but if they want to continue, then you can, send them a letter, say, look, you need to leave us alone. We didn't make any money off of it. We didn't attempt to make any money off of it. And by the way, if you keep on, I'm going to contact South Carolina Bar and tell them that you're practicing law in South Carolina without a license, and also you're violating ethics laws for making threats in your letters to us. So you might want to stop.
So we're just waiting again. We haven't contacted them. But my point is I didn't go out there and try to resolve any of that. You know, we as a team, we made the decision, nope, we're not going to even respond to it. Nope, we're not going to respond to it. Get the third letter. Nope, we're not going to respond to it. Okay, we'll get a lawyer. And did he charge us anything?
Nothing.
Man.
He sat down with me on the couch right there when I walked in. Let's talk about it. All right, 15 minutes later, I was out the door.
He said, throw these papers away.
Yeah, but the great thing about the team, we had some people had differing opinions. Well, why don't we give them a call? Well, we don't talk to a lawyer with a lawyer. And because they'll use everything against you. And okay, so everybody had different perspectives. And so that team came together stronger.
Right.
Because it was a team effort.
Right.
Different opinions.
And we got really good
Perspectives and
direction.
experience.
We got good direction.
I have a question.
Yes.
So he's talking to a church who told him that we have problems here. Did he tell you what any problems were?
I had no idea what you're talking about.
Okay, well, we were there last week.
That's a
and
problem.
They said, yes, I heard them say we have problems here. Anyway,
Yeah, said until the leadership changes in the church, you're gonna have problems in the pulpit.
so if somebody gives you that information, what would you form then, or you would figure out who you I guess would know who your elders were, but you would like put your heads together with them and how would you attack that? And then
Let me say this. Part of my being a leader is that I share that leadership. Okay? We don't do anything in isolation. I don't make, if we want to give $500 away, Chris and I can make that decision. My church has got enough money to do that.
But if you were walking into, I know you have the whole interview and he hasn't really
Right.
started down that road yet, but at what point does he form, does he form that group, that people you're talking about, where you work as a group, you put your heads together as a group?
If he took the church as a pastor.
If that ended up materializing, is that something that?
Can I give you the right answer? It'd take years.
Mhm.
It'd take years.
You gotta learn your people.
Yeah,
It'd
you gotta
take
learn-
years.
You gotta learn to trust them, because
Confidence.
I've seen where people, the new management comes in to a place or something, and all of a sudden there's somebody that will put on an act, and they're like your best buddy. I'm here to tell you all the dirt. Well, thing is, when you finger pointing at somebody, 3 finger pointing back at yourself, and they'll tell you everything that's going on with somebody else, never admit to themselves that they're part of the instigator and all that stuff.
Well, you get the one that looks great on paper and it's just,
But you'll get, but when you get the, you know, you'll get people trying to be your best buddy and stuff, and other people that seem like they're a problem, and they're the ones that are actually trying to keep things straight. And it takes time to get to really know and trust people and build that.
Right.
Long time, you know, no, Gary, 26 years.
sometimes critics aren't the ones that are the problem.
Right, so, you're gonna go, and if any church you take, especially a small Baptist church, if you take one, there are already problems there. That's why they've been through so many pastors for so long, and there are gonna be people that are trying to control. There will be people that do control. And you have to be able to teach and rightly divide the Word of God so that your convictions about things are based on the Word of God without lording it over them. Everybody is not going to change because you have taught the Word to them.
Can you not just let them do what they do until they come to you and ask you for your opinion? I mean, rather,
No,
like you say, going somewhere, don't plan on.
you can't go into a rabbit hole. You cannot go into a rabbit hole. You have to know, I want to know what's going on in my church.
Well, that's not what I mean. I mean, the people that they have there, at whatever church, that are causing problems, and if the church is in a decline because of the
Right.
problems that they're having, you know, I would assume, after listening to you, that you would go into the situation knowing what's going on, but until somebody comes and says, hey, what do you think about this, or what's your opinion on that? It seems to me like it would be easier to let them come to you. Like you say, let other people make mistakes and learn from themselves, and then when they fall, you're there to help pick them back up. And it seems like that would help build that relationship with the individual, or individuals, whoever it is, if they wanted to have that relationship with you in the first place. If you're there to say, hey, how can we maybe do this better the next time? Rather than going in and being like, I don't know how to fix all of this right now, all you have to do is just.
Well, I will still say, Alex, that when you go into a church for the first time, you don't, for the most part, you don't know people. And you don't know the guys that are the servants and the guys that are the troublemakers. And it's hard to distinguish sometimes. Some of I would say the guys that control the church really are the ones that have either been there a long time or they're the big givers in the church. They control the finances with their giving. Everybody knows who they are. You don't want to ruffle their feathers. But you can kind of pick up on that early on, but I don't think that you can go into a church and start solving all of their problems. That's the point. That's the point I'm trying to get across in all of this, is that you're going to have problems, and the critical areas are how do I handle those problems, right? And the answer is over a long period of time. Over a long period of time, huh?
one step at a time.
That's right, that's the way you eat the elephant, is one bite at a time.
Now, is there a difference between, you said you never want to be a controlling leader. Is there a difference in the way that you're using controlling here, and the way that you have some churches that come out and say, well, we want our pastor to be in charge of everything, he makes all the decisions in the church? Is there a difference between this type and that, or is it one and the same?
Let me say that if a church tells you, we want you to do everything, I'm going to tell you, it's a smoke screen. They don't want you to do everything. They want you to do everything for them. Right? They want you to do everything for them so that they don't have to do anything. And then once you do something that they don't like, they'll let you know that they really weren't interested in you doing everything. I'm serious. I'm talking reality here. Huh?
I say just not in those words.
Right. It's just you're not going to find those kind of churches that just every church you go to, or if you go to a new church, especially if you are a young pastor, this is your first church, your first venue. Nobody trusts you. Nobody trusts you. I don't care what's on your resume. I don't care how many Greek classes you've had. They don't trust you because they don't know you.
Well, what you did, I assume, when you came, you got with the deacons, which that's what we called them then, and expressed that you wanted their input. We're going to do this as a...
Yeah, unfortunately, we met once a month, which was pretty rough on me. Because they'd go to sleep. They were all they go to sleep. But they, over a period of time, after about 5 years, they trusted me, And it took, I'd probably been there 10 or 12 years, Tracy, before we actually did the teaching on elders and made the switch. And the reason that we didn't do that, the reason I didn't push it, because we didn't have any elders. It was just Andy, and then Larry came along, and then Chris got saved, but he wasn't ready to be an elder. So we had to wait. We had to wait, Alex. W-A-I-T, not W-E-I-G-H-T. We had to wait. We had to wait, And these are the kind of lessons that you probably would never get at the seminary I went to begin with at Southwestern. You just do not get the practical side of this. And to make your situation better, okay, just for you or for any of the men that are in this room, you have somebody like myself that's willing to help you walk through that process if you want to, if you want it. Everybody ought to have a mentor. I mean, myself included. Everybody ought to have mentors that they can look to help them when they get in. My mentors are my elders. They're my they're the primary elders in my life, and a guy by the name of Eddie. They help me. They're wise. They're smart. Our church runs very smoothly. It's just very smooth. We just don't have bumps in the road. So, but we didn't get there overnight. And we didn't get there after 3 weeks after I'd been there. And I said, I'm the leader. Leadership is something that you have to develop trust before anybody will let you.
You have to earn it.
You've got to earn your trust before anybody will ever let you really lead them. So, I hope that answers your question.
Does that answer your question?
Does that answer your question? I was talking to Alex, but
We're just using my experiences to answer the question.
No, okay. Well, but that's great, though. I appreciate you doing that, because your experience is what everybody else is going to experience. They will. Anybody that we have in this class that hasn't had a church and goes out and does all the interviews and all that kind of stuff and leaves the church that they're at, you're going to run into these problems. They're very real problems. And you're going to have people in an interview process that you like, and you're going to find out They could be your worst enemy when you finally get to the church.
Not even just from that aspect, but for those of us that may be deacons and or elders, depending on how our church leadership is set up, some of us are experiencing this firsthand now, not necessarily from being the pastor, but in some cases being part of the leadership team at our respective churches.
Yeah, but it's an ongoing problem, you know, but the stronger the leadership team is, the easier it is for people to follow. Trust me,
Yeah.
it is, so. A good leader is somebody who's involved. He recognizes the problems that his church may have. Every church's gonna have problems. Don't run away from that responsibility. And then he becomes a part of the solution for the problem that may happen. But, and this is very critical to me, he also knows how to delegate responsibilities to other people. Okay? If I gave Chris something to do, I'm going to get out of his way. I am not going to get in his way.
Well, an important part of the delegation too is if you give Chris a task, give him the tools he needs to complete said task also.
But
That's what a lot of leaders get wrong.
But I trust him.
Right.
It's the big issue. It's not that he's got the tools. I'll use an example that you guys that are in law enforcement, three of you, thankfully that we weren't in law enforcement.
I don't know what that hint was.
Everybody give me give me a high five on that. You may have somebody that's got all the right tools and has done all the training, and then you go into a drug raid where they've got the house has got nothing but guns in it and people that are willing to shoot and kill you, and this guy's never been on one, even though he's been to all the videos, and he's not really the guy you want to go in with. You know, you kind of want him to stay behind and watch what's going to happen.
We put the new guys on SWAT team, they were in the back.
Yep, that's right.
I could have a big old toolbox, a lot of tools, and I don't know how to use any of them.
That's right.
We got a shop full at the house.
That's right. So, you gotta delegate responsibilities to other people, but generally it should be to people that you have developed a trust relationship with. Because you can set people up for failure that aren't qualified to do what you believe that they need to do. You just set them up for failure, and that's going to destroy your leadership. If I want somebody to do something, if I ask somebody to do something, I want to spend a little bit of time with them about my expectations, but I don't want to make that the rule book. I just want it to be,
Here's your guardrails.
huh?
Here's your guardrails.
Right, this is the fence, if we can stay within this area, and you go take care of the rest of it. A good coach doesn't make every decision on the team. That's why you play football, you got the head coach, and he makes the critical decisions, but you got the line coach, and he puts his guys in, then you got the guy that's the quarterback coach, and the wide receiver coach, and, you know, all of those kind of things, and a good coach lets those guys make the decisions, you know. So the more responsibility that you give away to others, everybody listen, the more responsibility that you give away, the greater is going to be your influence. You're going to have much greater influence if you give responsibility to people and let them improve themselves and go out and actually do a good job. People love when others trust them with responsibility. They
Start
really
with
do.
small stuff.
Huh?
Start with small stuff.
Yeah, sure. Some people don't want the small stuff, and you probably ought to stay away from them. But that's where God says that you have to be faithful in the little things before you can be faithful in the larger things. That's a really strong biblical principle that I would follow. And so you just have to remember that they may not achieve the goals of the tasks that you set them out to achieve, all right? You have to give them the freedom to fail. Anybody that you give responsibility to has to have the freedom to fail without you launching a campaign against them in some way that kind of undermines you know, what they've done. That and you have to let them determine how they want to carry out that responsibility. That's one of the marks of a good leader, right? Having to control everything is a death knell to a pastor's leadership in the church. It's a death knell to it. I think that Chris and Brenda and Tracy, that they can testify that I don't think anybody would say I try to control anything in our church. So, and if they did, I'd have a talk with them after the show last night. That's just what you've got to learn. Right?
That's the same at home too, so we know that.
Uh-huh.
You don't do that at your own home.
I don't. My wife and I are a team. It's not me lording my leadership over her. I said leadership in the home is joint, it's equal. We talked about that, and you missed that, but we talked about that for a long time. There are some pastors that give other people responsibilities, but in the process, they give them a long list of do's and don'ts. And so they really take away their freedom to fail. When I do marriage ceremonies, one of the things, I got to do a marriage on Friday. Hopefully we'll have some heat.
It's supposed to rain.
Well, I don't worry about the rain, but both of our heating systems shut down at the church, and so in fact, we didn't have any heat at church on Sunday, and it was really, really cold.
We heard.
Yeah, James filled us in Sunday night.
It was really cold. And I didn't cut my message short, and I don't think anybody didn't hear any complaining about it, but I just didn't know how to do that. So, but when you give people responsibilities, but you don't give them all the do's and don'ts, when you actually do that for that person, you're actually telling that person, I do trust you. I do trust you. Let's just say it fails. Let's just say something happens and it fails and it just doesn't work out like you want it to be. You can say, hey man, everything's fine. Everything's fine. We'll figure out, we'll get back together again and we'll just figure out what we need to do if we want to get it back on track. Maybe it's just not something God wanted us to do, so that they don't look like an idiot, so that they don't look stupid. You don't want to make anybody look stupid.
One thing that I've experienced, the pastor that I'm under now, kind of touching on y'all's question earlier. Baptist church is good at having committees. We have bereavement committee, flower committee, personnel, budget, all these things. The pastor that I'm under now, when he came in, he gave them all the power to make decisions. And that has worked so well. I mean, we have bylaws. I mean, the flower committee, they have a budget. They can't just, you have to follow the guidelines. But he says if you can't make decisions, there's no need to have a committee. Like his question when he came in, you asked those committees, when was the last time you made a decision? And most of them would just make recommendations and depend on somebody else. And if it's within your budget and you need to, the bereavement committee, if you can't find somebody to cook, call a caterer. If you got the money, just do it. It's got to be done. And that's really, that's hitting on everything that you talking about, good leadership, just, delegates and advise you influence.
I think the larger the church, the more committees you're going to have.
Yeah.
And it's okay. A committee's okay. In fact, I'd rather give it to a group of people that can make a decision. I don't think that we have one committee in our church, and it's the cemetery committee.
But before that, we had a lot of groups that couldn't make any decisions.
Right.
It was like their hands were tied and And they were just meeting and not getting anywhere or getting anything done. And there was,
It's tough.
it just needed to be released, like, do it.
Yeah, do it.
I had one talk to me that started with one committee, and then by the time we stopped talking, they had already elected a completely different committee that had to go redo all the other stuff that the other committee did, because nobody wanted to make a decision about anything.
Well, it's a part of leadership, right? It's all a part of good leadership, and knowing how to lead. Just remember that when you are more trusting of other people, that they will be more trusting of you. Right? Don't berate them because they failed. Do not berate them in any way. Just kind of rejoice. Say, hey man, I've failed a lot in my life. I made a lot of really bad decisions. I'm not going to tell you all the story about me buying a Vega when we went out to buy.
Oh, you did tell us.
I think we've heard that.
Well.
We've heard that story.
I've heard that story before, but it was a dumb decision, you know. My wife is very gracious that she doesn't bring it up.
Too often.
She doesn't bring it up at all unless I bring it up. And then she says, yeah, you made a really stupid decision. No. So, but I made a lot more than just one. And I made a lot of bad decisions in ministry. Because I just didn't know any better. I mean, I didn't know any better.
Like what were some things you did that you wouldn't do now?
That you want to talk about?
That you want to.
That's the key point.
What would be one that a really bad decision I made?
You need to change the car.
Maybe we need to ask this friend.
As I'm teaching, I'll think about it and then I'll let you know. Because I promise you that I've made plenty. So the more important that you can help your people to feel, the greater will be your influence in their life. If you've made a real contribution to our church, they're going to want to stay at your church. You know, if you've helped them to achieve what, you know, you trusted them, and they become a part at that point. That's why we have a lot of people that are just sitting on the sidelines. We have a lot of spectators in churches.
Yeah, we do.
And there's a guy by the name of, I forget what the guy's name was. He wrote a book called, it's about just being a spectator. I can't remember the name of the book. I read it a long time ago. I don't want to be a spectator, and I don't want my people to be a spectator. But I don't want them, at the same time, I want to be able to give them responsibility. That the church needs people that are responsible. There's a lot to do in a church that's successful. There's a lot to do. And if the pastor tries to achieve all that on his own, he's kind of dead meat. Because he can't do it. I can't do it. I don't want to do it. I mean, I don't want to do it. So I personally found that the more responsibility that I truly give to somebody, that the more they want my input and feedback. You understand what I just said? Mm-hmm. The more responsibility I give to them, the more they don't want to make the decision by themselves. You know, they want your feedback. Because they don't want to disappoint you. And if you're a good leader, you know how to give that leadership. You know how to give leadership away and responsibility away to your people. All right, that was number 10. With 1, 2, 3, that should have been ABC.
That was number 3 and number 10.
No,
10.3. No one.
Number 11, and this is the last one, then I'll conclude this study on convictions, is that character is contagious. We're talking about controlling convictions. If I have anything that that I want to control my life is my character, my integrity. And character is contagious. When you know somebody that's impeccable character, they are trustworthy. They always tell you the truth. I have a rule when I do marriage counseling, and I don't like to do marriage counseling. It's the most difficult thing that you will do in the ministry, period. It's the most difficult thing that you will do in the ministry. Is to do marriage counseling. Probably, I couldn't tell you what the percentage was of people that made it and people that didn't make it, but it's just it's long, it takes time, it's emotional. You hear things you don't want to hear. You witness things that you don't want to witness. It's a very, very difficult, a difficult area. But I think that this is an area that really doesn't need a lot of explanation. Character, integrity, right?
It's a good attribute.
It's a critical attribute. It's not a nice attribute. It's a critical attribute. It will destroy your ministry if you do not have it. You can make one really bad mistake. I was telling you the story about Ravi Zacharias last week, that for all that he did that was good, in my mind, he lost it all. He lost it all. I wouldn't buy a book about him, an apologetics book. I wouldn't teach him an apologetics book that he had written for these very reasons. He was unfaithful to his wife. He was doing things that he never should have done. Everybody can make mistakes. Everybody can make mistakes. But when you're in the ministry, those mistakes get magnified. And most of them will disqualify you from the ministry. All right? They don't disqualify you from life. They don't disqualify you from being a Christian. They disqualify you from any kind of leadership position in a ministry, or even in a ministry. So you have to be a little bit careful that you look at your character and the virtue that if you don't have those things, you cannot be useful to God. Period. I think God will shut the door on you, and you will not enjoy the door slamming as you walk out. I think if you don't have character, that a leader doesn't have anything to offer. What would he offer you? Information? A leader has to have character. He has to have character. You can be sitting around at night, love watching pornography. When your wife goes to bed, you just can't do that. It's just not acceptable. You'll never be able to have a ministry. I think about Samson and just what happened to him, because he wasn't willing to do what God had called him to do, and that was to be a Nazirite and then a deliverer of his people. He lost everything. He eventually lost his life, but he lost his eyes. He was an embarrassment to God, if I can say it that way. Just killing people to get some clothes. What is that? What is that? I have no clue. I still don't understand some of those stories, but what we know is that character is the byproduct of godly convictions. So the more that you develop your godly convictions, the deeper should be your character. There are things I feel really, really strongly about. You're not going to change my convictions about it. You have convictions. The next class we teach on loving your wife like Christ loved the church. This is almost an entire course. Probably 12 out of the 16 weeks is on that one topic, maybe more. It may take the whole semester by the time I get through. That's such a deep conviction that I have, is that your ministry is never any better than how you treat your wife. So if there's any single area of ministry in which all of us should really strive, it's being a model. It's being that model for a contagious character, where people know that you are a man of character and virtue. One of the rules that I have when I do marriage counseling, and I live and die by this rule. I mean, I do. If I find out that you're lying to me in a marriage counseling session, I will not counsel with you. You can repent and come back later and we can talk about it, but at that point, and I find that out, we will not schedule anymore. I cannot work with you. I feel very deeply about that. Now, you're going to ask the question, well, why do you feel that way? Well, it ought to be obvious. It's because I've been in enough situations to know that if people are not honest with you, you cannot help them. You cannot help them. I'm not going to let them waste my time. And I hope that you won't let them waste yours either. That you'll make that decision. It's a conviction that I have. I can help them later if they're willing to change. But let's just say, for instance, let's just make it simple. If you want people to be fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ, and that's what you should be aiming at, then you have to be a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ. Right? You can't be a Sunday morning Christian. I live out my Christian life every day. Every day. And you got to live your Christian life out every day. And I've stated it often, but leadership is always concerned with influence. Influence, now I want to tell you what I think influence is. Influence is taking somebody that's very imperfect and getting them from A to B. And once you get them to B, you want to go from B to C. And once you get them from C, you want to go from C to D. That's what this class and any other class that we teach is about. It's going from A to D, right? Or A to Z, however long it takes. It's trying to figure out, how do I get you from A to B? Your papers are terrible. Your papers need. I was talking to, who was I talking to? Was it today? I was talking to somebody that had graded a paper for somebody. I'm just going to tell you, I'll tell you the two stories. I'm trying to figure out who it was. Oh, it was one of the guys I pray with on Tuesdays and Fridays. And he was sharing with me before we started praying about one of the students that we have at Covington. And he was grading the papers for Dr. Sullivan, all right? We have a lot of e-course people, and he was grading the paper, and the paper was 10 pages long on whatever topic it was. And if you know anything about plagiarism, all right, if you know anything about plagiarism, you can tell when somebody, I know how every one of you write, all right? I mean, I know how you write. If you give me a paper, I know that you wrote this, or I know that somebody else wrote this. And if you didn't write it and you didn't give credit to somebody for it, I have a plagiarism checker, and Grammarly will do it. It has a plagiarism checker in it. And so I don't care if you miss something and you quote something and you just didn't get it. I'm not interested in just one incident that somebody has. But if you go steal somebody's idea and you just cold copy something and you don't give them credit for it, that's plagiarism. And the school has a policy that if you plagiarize twice and you get called down for it, that you can't be a student any longer. I'm talking about blatant plagiarism. all right? Making somebody feel like it's your idea. I don't know how many, this thing about convictions that I've written here. I don't have any bibliography on this one because I wrote the whole thing myself out of my experience. My experience is related to other things that I have read that I may not remember, but I haven't just gone in there and just cold copied somebody's ideas without giving them credit for it. I feel really strongly about that. I would hate to write a book or something and then get called down for plagiarizing. That wouldn't be a really good example. So this guy had written the first page in his language, and then he had just cold copied the next 9 pages by F.F. Bruce. Anybody know who F.F. Bruce is? F.F. Bruce is one of the premier Greek scholars in the world. In the world. Now, if you think that F.F. Bruce,
ambitions.
if you think that F.F. Bruce talks like everybody else, and all this guy had to do was to put in a sentence or two, and it pulls up that this is from F.F. Bruce and his book on such and such. 9 pages out of 10. 9 pages out of 10, somebody just cold copied. All right?
That's blatant.
That's beyond blatant. But I got to tell you my best story on plagiarism, okay? It's worth it because what we're talking about is character, right? And if you don't have character when you can write a paper, if you're not willing to get this right, you don't need to be in the pulpit. Why would a church want you? Why would God want you in the pulpit if you're going to plagiarize stuff? So anyway, this was years ago, and I was teaching at Town Creek in Aiken, in the old building, and I had a class of about 15 students, and I gave them, on one of the assignments was a book review. Now, what does everybody know about book reviews? Do you know anything about book reviews that I need to tell you? Can you tell me anything about book reviews? Almost any book that's ever been written has a book review on it. Somebody's written a book review before it ever even comes out. So you might go look up just a simple book, and you just go Google book reviews for book X, and so you can go in there and copy and paste and do everything that you want to. So apparently these guys just didn't feel like they had enough time to do the work through the book. All you got to do is write it, and all I'm asking for is a short essay. I just want your opinion. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree with anything the author said. I don't care. I just want you to give a book review.
They have to read it.
They have to read it. All right.
That's the hard part.
That is probably the right observation. Did you actually read this book? And my assumption was that nobody did. All right, that's my assumption. So I got about 15 students in the class, and 3 of them hand me their paper in. Well, I know on the first one, I knew that this was not right. I'd graded this guy's papers before, and it was like, you didn't write this. I couldn't have written one this well. And so, it was a plagiarism issue for me. And then I go to another essay. They had copied the same exact review. And then I had a third student had just cold copied. We're talking about no introduction, no anything. Bad English, no nothing, right? No nothing. Ain't nobody paid attention to what they were doing.
That's when you pull them all three
And
together.
I got 3 of them. So I handed out the papers, and when it was all over, I'd handed out the papers and graded them to the other students. But I didn't give them theirs. I did this right at the end of the class. And I said, I'd like for you to, I'd like for Jeremy and Robbie and Alex to stay after class. I just want to share something with you, okay? And everybody left. And I threw the papers down in front of them. I said, I know that you don't know that I know that every one of these papers you copied from this review, every one of these papers are exactly the same. What do you say about that? What do you say about that? Just give me your answer about that. Do you think that's right?
Inexcusable.
It is inexcusable. Do you think that's right? Do you think that's what God wants? Do you think that's what we do in this school? Do you just want a degree? I said, you've had your first chance. If this ever happens again, you will be dismissed. And this will go on your transcript that you got removed from the school for plagiarism twice after being recognized for it. I mean, this was blatant. They just sat there dumbfounded. And I rebuked them. I mean, I'm just saying, I rebuked them. I was so upset that they had treated that so lightly. It was an easy assignment. Read the book.
Give me your opinion.
You can say, I would have felt better if you just said, I haven't had a chance to read the book. That's honesty, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's honesty. What you've done is that you have lied. You have lied. Why would you think that you deserve to be in the pulpit, to be a pastor of a church? You have no character. There's nothing virtuous about anything that you have done here. I mean, it was a very long 15 or 20 minutes of me just not really happy. That's the only way I could help those men, right? That was the only way I could help them. That was the only way I could talk to them. Was in a reproving, not just correcting, in a rebuking way. And I told them, I was very frank with them. I said, I do not want you to be my student if this is what you're going to do. Please do not take any more of my classes. Because if you don't think, I wasn't suspecting that you would ever do this. But every paper you give me from here on out, I'm suspect. I'm sure I can trust you. So, character is everything. And you need to understand that. I think this idea of, just whatever method that you may choose to try and accomplish how to get somebody from A, B, C, D, it's a little challenging. It's a little challenging. I don't know how to really say this. I think at a personal level, this has always been a challenge for me. But I really believe that the way that I do it, I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, is that I feel like that I have to be passionate about what it is that I'm teaching. And I have to be accurate about what I'm teaching. I have to have a passion, I have to be accurate. I can't be accurate if I don't study. I have to be a model as to what somebody needs to be doing. And then I want to live out what I've been teaching. So how do we conclude this brief study on convictions? I'll give you 3 things. These are not long. My church has heard me say that many times. We're almost done, right?
5 months later.
Yeah, 5 months later. Number 1, make sure that you do not die on a hill that God never intended for you to die on. All right, this is just my concluding remarks. Just make sure you don't die on a hill that God never intended you to die on. There are plenty of hills out there to die on. Just Make sure you pick the right one. I think this is much easier than you may think, to die on the wrong hill. I've known men who were so discouraged after taking their first church and enduring through nonsense and just complications and just bitter people and angry people and argumentative people and controlling people that they just never went back into the ministry. Just never went back into the ministry at all. They left the ministry permanently. They died on the wrong hill. Wrong hill to die on, right? They tried to get people to kind of implement change, and they wouldn't do it. And they left. They got so discouraged they left the ministry. Wrong place to die. A lot of other options out there. Number 2, you got to live out your convictions without pressing them on other people. You don't have to. I don't want you to have my convictions. I want you to have God's convictions, right? I want you to have your convictions. You have to remember that people are generally watching you before they ever are willing to really listen to you. They're watching you. They're watching your life. If I talk about loving my wife like Christ loved the church, as much as I do, I had one gentleman in my church said, "I'm tired of you teaching on this." I taught on it for 11 weeks or something. And he said, "I'm really tired. I'll be glad when you get through with this." And he told me a lot about his marriage in that statement right there. I'm just tired of this. He was serious. He was serious as a heart attack. And we were really good friends to boot. And I've done marriage counseling with him. I have a pastor. My wife and I had a pastor that completely misinterpreted 1 Timothy chapter 2. And the last part there that has to do about women that can't braid their hair and can't wear any gold, and they can't wear any expensive clothes and all of that stuff. And you can't wear any makeup. He went so far to tell us that we needed to use honey and not sugar. It was just crazy stuff. I sat under that way too long. I just sat under that nonsense way too long. He knew nothing about hermeneutics. He knew nothing about the principle called cultural transposition that we studied in hermeneutics. You may not even remember what it means, but it's a very vital area of hermeneutics where, for instance, if Paul said not to drink wine, but to be filled with the Spirit. Well, does that mean it's okay to go out and drink liquor and get drunk? No, the whole point of that passage is that the whole point of it is to be under the control of God's Spirit, not something else. If Paul was here today, he probably wouldn't even use the word wine. He would probably use the word crack cocaine, or what are some of the other stuff that they take, meth heads and liquor, and I don't even know if they had liquor back in those days. If they did, somebody would have drank it, right? So it's just a matter of understanding that my wife, if she wanted to braid her hair and go out into the garden and work, and he saw that, he would have said something about it. Like, "Are you kidding? Are you kidding me?" What a stupid way to handle the scriptures.
You would have had a fit.
It's not even common sense. I'm sorry, Robert.
I said, you would have had a fit when I had my beard braided.
He wouldn't have out of me.
No, I didn't say, I'm talking about that pastor.
Yeah.
I've had some teens before braid my beard just for fun, and you would have had a fit then.
Yeah. This is crazy.
Yeah, I went to a Pentecostal church a long time ago before I got saved. They didn't even want to wear wedding rings, the women had to wear dresses, men weren't even supposed to wear short pants, shorts. I mean, it was ridiculous.
Yeah, there have been plenty of churches where the women can't wear pants. It's just crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Go to an Old Testament passage. But what are you going to do about wool? You can't mix materials and all that kind of stuff. It's just, that's bad hermeneutics and not knowing what the principles of hermeneutics are and how to rightly divide the Word of God.
You said it was
And then
cultural transmittance.
transposition.
Transposition.
Cultural transposition. It's a whole teaching in the spirits. And the worst part about it is that he pressed all his convictions on other people, and in the process made everybody feel guilty from the pulpit. Not the kind of pastor you want to be, and not the kind of pastor that you want to sit under. It didn't take long for the people to leave the church. It was either going to be him or them, and he was dead set that he wasn't going to leave, and everybody else left, and they should have. He was a false teacher as far as I'm concerned. So just live out your convictions with passion, but make sure that they're biblical convictions and that you have rightly divided the Word of God, so that your convictions are based on good exegesis of the passage. Number 3, this is the last one. When you do share convictions that you know that others may not be able to readily accept, please don't make them feel like second-class citizens. In other words, don't make somebody feel guilty because they don't hold the same conviction that you do about something. Just don't make them feel guilty. Don't make them feel like they're a second-class citizen. Give them the opportunity to disagree with you, but without demeaning and undermining their own conviction. If you're a good teacher, and you're accurate, they'll come around. They will come around eventually. Just don't let it bother you. That's not a hill to die on. Sanctification is a lifelong process, so you need to give people the time, right? Time is the right word. You need to give them the time to grow in their understanding of Scripture, whatever it may be. Learning is a lifelong process. If you're not learning, you're not growing. We talked about that in church on Sunday, right? To grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord Jesus and what that meant. And developing discernment is a lifelong process. So, okay, any questions on that whole study? That's study number 10, I think. It might not be 10, it might be something else. But anybody have any questions on that? Good. All right, I haven't handed this one out to you yet. I'll bring it next week, and I'll try to bring an update on the marriage one as well. Not marriage yet, but loving your wife like Christ loved the church. I want to talk about exercising self-control. Now, you might think, how many pages I got on self-control here? I probably got 13 pages. You mean you can talk to me for 13 pages of notes, maybe 3 weeks here, 2.5 at the best on self-control? Yep, I can. This is the next non-negotiable attribute. If you're going to be called into the ministries, that you have to exercise self-control. Now, I'm going to give you a confession out of my own life, all right, of where I failed in the ministry. You wanted some, Rachel.
Yes.
I'm going to give you one.
Okay, I'm
All
listening.
right, I'm not going to give you all of them. I'm going to give you one of them. So, when I was a much younger Christian and deciding to go into the ministry, I made a terrible mistake one time. I had been called to be an associate pastor at a church, which I was. I had actually left my architectural firm that I was a partner in to do this because I just had this insatiable burn that I had to teach. Now, honestly, when I look back on it, I was just stupid. That's all I can tell you. I was just stupid. I had never had a church before. I had taught in prisons and coffee houses and, you know, that kind of stuff. But I had some inflated idea of who I was and what I could do. And every one of those ideas was completely wrong. And I was young, I was impetuous. I thought way too highly of my own personal teaching skills, really. And so, at no fault of my pastor, I became very frustrated with him one time when he was going on vacation. And so I'm the associate pastor at the church, and I'm just assuming that he's going to ask me, oh Gary, I got associate pastor after my name, that he's going to ask me to handle the teaching while he's gone. I'm ready to go. I'm fired up. I'll study hard. This is all I do every day. This is what God's called me to do. And he asked one of the elders of the church. And didn't even ask me. Didn't even tell me. I mean, it was like. So we get to church, and one of the elders is teaching, and so when he got back from vacation, I was still very upset about what had transpired. And I went to his house, and I did several things that were wrong. First, I should never have gone to his house. He understood that I was young in the ministry. He was kind of young in the ministry too, but he was much more mature than I was. And I told him that I could no longer sit under his teaching because it was not ministering to me. I basically called him a bad teacher. That's what I did. Nah, that's not what God wanted me to do. That's not what God wanted me to do. And God disciplined me for 12 years. Okay, I'm just telling you, the bottom line was that God disciplined me for 12 years for what I did. And to this day, I believe that was the worst decision that I ever made in the ministry. To go to this pastor's house. He was a guy that loved me. He cared for me. We were really, outside of this event, we were really good friends. We did things together. We rode dirt bikes. We played golf together. We'd go out to eat together. This was a godly man. He studied hard. He loved my family. I had 2 young children at the time, and he treated all of us with a great deal of respect. And God disciplined me for 12 years, gave me what I wanted for not exercising self-control. Self-control.
Do you think that he kind of warned you before that? Like he gave you like, don't do this. And then this was like the big,
No.
You didn't listen the first time?
No.
He just hit you with.
No, he just didn't
He
let
just
me
let him
do.
do what
He
he
didn't let me
wanted.
do what I wanted to do.
God just handed him the rope, and Gary said, okay!
And he probably had good reason because of the way that I responded to that. So, whatever I did on that evening still haunts me. It still haunts me. I shared this with my church recently. I don't know how long ago it was. I hadn't been at church but a month. A month. A month. 30 days. Let me back up. I'd been at the church for 3 years, but I'd only been an associate pastor for a month. And I'd preached at the church plenty of other times. But this one I was too young. I don't know what got into me. I went back about a year later. I sought his forgiveness, which he graciously granted me. I knew that he would. He was a lot more mature than I was. And it was wrong, and it was very undeserved on his part, and very overreactionary, very unnecessary on my part that I would go to him and say the ugly words that I said to him. Just unnecessary, stupid. It doesn't even qualify. What a bad decision this was. What did I lack? I lacked several things. I lacked wisdom, but in this case, I not only lacked wisdom, I lacked significant wisdom, and I lacked self-control. I lacked self-control. I just went out, I reacted, I said something, this was it, I'm done, we're done. I went back, I joined my firm again. They were glad to have me, but it was just very unnecessary.
Well, you said you reacted instead of responded.
I did. See, that's one of my rules now. That's one of my main principles. I teach my church all the time. You know, God wants you to respond rather than react. And so, but I wasn't smart enough to know any of that kind of stuff then. I was a young pastor without any experience. And the only thing that I can say about the entire incident is that God taught me a very needed lesson in my life about honoring those that He had placed over my life. And from that day to this day, I've always honored anybody that was over my life, whether it was at work or at church. Whether it was at the next church that we went to, I've honored them. I made a terrible, terrible mistake. And I learned from it. If you don't learn from your mistakes, you're stupid, right? Right? Right. Somebody say right.
Right.
Normally we'll say you're God and repeat them, not Gary, you're stupid.
And he can't go to any other church now.
So in approaching this area of a servant leader's ministry attributes, what you want to do is that you want to learn how to resolve conflict without creating greater distance between yourself and those who may be actually creating the conflict, right? So let's just get the picture here. It's you, and you're in conflict with something that somebody else is doing, or how they are reacting, or however they are responding. You don't want to create any more distance. You want to be wise. You want to be under self-control. You want to know how to resolve conflict, and that takes a lot of self-control, especially in a church where everybody thinks they're right sometimes. And so ministry conflict is unavoidable, so it's so important that you're not caught off guard by the problems that are going to happen and by the conflict that's going to happen in your life. I think to enter into the ministry without understanding that conflict is inescapable and unavoidable is probably somewhat naive and adolescent. You know, it's very naive to think that, hey, I'm me and I got this figured out. You don't have it figured out. It doesn't matter who you are. I don't care how much seminary training you get. Until you get on-the-job training, you haven't had any training, right? You can go through boot camp all you want. You were in the Marines, weren't you, Robbie?
Yes, sir.
You were in the Army, weren't you?
Air Force.
Air Force. You can get all the training that you want in the classroom, but until you get your boots on the ground, there's nothing there's nothing like it. The classroom cannot, this classroom, no matter how much I teach, can help you until you get out there and actually have a conflict that's very difficult. They're all different, right? They're all different, and they all have a different set of solutions.
Tests.
Yes?
So they're tests.
A test, that's what we call them at church. This is a test. And you don't want to fail the test. So, I think any position, almost any position of leadership has the potential of experiencing conflict at many different levels. I can tell you this right now, I'll just tell you that if you don't take care of people's children, they won't come to your church. You better figure that out real quick. If you mistreat them, if you got really bad nursery workers, or if you're kind of, you just don't handle the children properly, they will run you off, or they will take off, one of the two. You cannot mistreat other people's children. Is Robbie okay?
I'm getting
Yeah.
making sure I was good. I was checking it.
All right.
He gave me a thumbs up, but I don't mistreat my kids.
All right, good. That's because everybody else is in the room, right? No.
That doesn't change, I'll tell you that.
That's good though, that's good. But the problem is, okay, and one of the principles that I've taught in some of the other classes is that once an issue is created, once somebody, it doesn't have to be you, but once somebody has created an issue, that issue has to have some kind of resolution to it. And you're in trouble if you think that the resolutions are always going to be clean. That's a pipe dream. You're daydreaming at that point. You're not awake. You're sleeping. You're having a nightmare. If you think that you have a clean resolution to every problem that happens in your church. When I first got to Chime Bell, one of the things that they asked me to do, Tracy, I think this was, you may not have been there, and I know Chris wasn't, or probably wasn't, but they wanted me to change everything. Because they said, our church is dying. So I said, all right, and we got, you remember Brian Williamson that came to our church? And I asked him, I said, let's just change the music a little bit. And he didn't do anything unusual. He just changed it a little bit more blended music, and they didn't like that. The guy that led the music didn't like that. And he came up to me one day and he said, I forget exactly how I said it, but he basically said, you don't have a clue what you're doing. And I mean, I'm making up that's what he told me. That's what he was telling me, is that you don't need to be in the ministry because you don't know what you're doing. And so he just up and left the church. He really loved my wife, but he didn't give a hoot about me. I'm serious, guy. He had a little boy that was handicapped, or grandson that was handicapped, and Brenda just really took care of, what was his name? Jeffrey. And he was blind, and he was just a really sweet little boy. My wife just ministered to him and did a great job, and it's like this guy didn't even appreciate that, and there was nothing I could do about it. He just didn't think I knew what I was doing. This is my first church. I'm not counting the other church I told you about. That was
You learned your lesson there.
Yeah. I didn't fight it. Here's my rule that I learned from the missionary from Spain. I've told you this. I'll give it to you again. So it'll stay tattooed on your brain. Don't give up. Don't give in. Don't fight back. Right? Don't give up. Don't give in. Please don't fight back. I didn't fight back with him. He left, and I stayed there, and I'm in my 28th year. There's some conflicts that you cannot resolve. Just accept that. Accept that. Every solution, every resolution is not going to be a clean resolution. This wasn't even a resolution. Well, years later, down the road, he got a job working at a funeral home. And so I'm a pastor, and people do funerals, and he has to come back to our church, or you go to a visitation, and there he is. And I'm still at Chime Bell. And he's somewhere else and been to somewhere else because he didn't like something there. And I'm still rolling right along, and the church is doing fine. And he just wasn't willing, he just didn't like me, or whatever. He said, "You're too young." And I was 47 or 48 years old. I don't think that's too young. I was ready. I paid my dues.
How old was he at the time?
He was probably in his 70s. Huh?
60s anyway.
Yeah, he was at least in his 60s.
Jeffrey was the same age as Christy, I think.
He was in his late 60s, early 70s or something. And he just left. He didn't like me for whatever reason. I think that the majority of people that I know that have left the ministry were very often sometimes blindsided. I think that's the right word. They were blindsided by some conflict that they weren't expecting to happen. Somebody betrayed them, somebody didn't give them the attention that they wanted, somebody said something about them behind their back. You know, I have a good friend, Eddie. Well, I'd say about this about any of my good friends. But I tell him, we kid around a lot, and I said, "Eddie, I'm never going to tell you anything good to your face, but I want you to know I talk about you behind your back all the time. I only say good things about you behind your back." You know, we have a really great relationship. We just kid around with one another. And then, to make it worse, and this is what you really need to understand, if you're married, sometimes the conflict may be very quickly directed at your family. If you've never had that happen, I had a guy in my church, the church that we used to go to, in Town Creek, and I wasn't even a pastor, and he just said things, I'd say nice things. He finally got saved, and now we're really great friends, but I'd say some things to him, and he'd say negative things about my family. It was really, really tough. I've known men whose wives or children were incredibly hurt and emotionally damaged by the incredulous criticism of someone who had virtually no spiritual content to them whatsoever. I got some statistics I'm going to read you again about husbands and wives in the ministry. It's in the next course, I think, the next class. But this is one of those areas where, man, when somebody starts attacking your family, I mean, hey, your wife or your children, I can take about anything. You can attack me all you want, but please don't say something about my wife. Don't say something about my wife. You know, I'm gonna protect my wife. I'm just not gonna let it go on long. You know. And then on top of all that, the enemy is more than content with finding ways to discourage you, even if that doesn't involve you, but it involves your family, right? He's okay if he can't get to you, but he can get to your family. He can get to your children. If you got young children the age of Hunley and on down, and he can get to your children, he's okay with that. You know, there are things that happen in churches all the time where that happens to men in the ministry. The enemy cannot get to them, but he gets to their family. And that can be very, very difficult. So having said all that, it seems that one of the first lessons that you have to learn if you're entering into the ministry for the first time is a very simple lesson. Let me give it to you. It's that not everyone that you're dealing with as a servant leader, as a pastor, as mature and spiritually minded as you may think that they are. Every church has sheep and goats. Every church has good fish and bad fish. These are the words that Jesus used. Every church has wheat and tares. Every church has angels of light, right? That are dressed in, they have wolves dressed in sheep's clothing. This is normal. This is normal. If you don't think it's normal, be careful, because the enemy will hurt you in that area. You may have people that you're ministering with who are not even born again, who are not even saved. You may have people on your leadership team who are not saved. I know plenty of deacons in churches that I've been in that I don't think that some of the deacons are actually saved. I know of one deacon that was, when I was the chairman of the deacons, and if you went into his home, he had pornographic literature. He had Playboy and whatever, I don't know what the names of them were, in his living room on a table for his children to see. His son told me that. He said, "Oh yeah, my dad looks at that stuff all the time." I'm going, "What'd you just tell me? What'd you just tell me?" "Yeah, oh yeah, my dad, he looks at that stuff all the time." This is not that uncommon, and I think it can create a multitude of unresolvable conflicts, especially for those that are starting out in the ministry. So I'll just ask you a question. I said, "Well, I've never had a church before," and I find out that one of the deacons, and that's the church government that we follow. We have pastors under the deacons, and but I'm going to teach the word. I'm going to preach the word, and I find out that one of my deacons is looking at pornographic literature at night or videos or whatever when his wife goes to bed. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? I'm going to tell you that you better exercise some self-control before you go off on your biblical rampage, because you'll be the first one to leave. You'll be the first one that gets asked to leave, because everybody else, because you embarrassed somebody, been in that church, they may have been, their family had been faithful to that church, the mama went there, the daddy went there, the brothers went there, and you just jumped way out ahead of where you should be. Do you need to address it at some time? Yeah, sure you do. It needs to be in private, right? Everybody say yes.
Yes. The
It
first
needs
time.
to be in private. It needs to be in private. And if you're spiritual, you're to restore somebody, not to expose them. You know? There are plenty of guidelines in the scripture as to how to do that. So if you're just beginning in a ministry venue, it's critical to realize that the people that you're ministering to do not have any way to have confidence in you. Okay? Just hear what I'm saying. You have a church. This is your first church. They don't know you. They have a resume. You sent them a video of they don't know you. They don't know your temperament. They don't know your personality. They don't know your habits. They don't know if you love your wife. They don't know if you're faithful. They don't know if you study. You know, you were asking me about the guidelines that you sent me. That was a really great thing that you did. And my answer to that was it's okay for a church to have expectations. In fact, I would think it would be wrong for them not to have expectations. But what you'll find, Alex, if a church gives you a list like they gave to you, or one that you knew somebody had, that if you knew you had something that really conflicted with what they were looking for, you have to talk about that in an interview process. But the others, I think I would do everything I could to follow it. If you do that, the people will trust you. You know, you'll give them confidence that you can. The one that I hate the most is that you got to be at the office 8 to 5. Well, they're not really saying that you have to be at the office 8 to 5 every day and you got to clock in. That's not what they're telling you. They're just telling you that they don't want you to be like half the other pastors that they had, that they never knew where they were, and they'd drive down by the church and there was nobody there. Well, where's my pastor? That's what they're telling you. They're not telling you that you got to be there. I never studied my church. Chris and Tracy live right beside the church. You never see me there during the week because I'm at home studying, and everybody knows that. But it's always been that way. And I told my church that before I ever took the job. So you just gotta give them a way to be able. You gotta give them the time to be able to measure you. Just do a good job of teaching and preaching. Be faithful. If they want you to visit X number of people a week, go see them. So long it doesn't take up all of your time and become a parasite, a ministry parasite. Visitation is a ministry parasite that ought to be shared by the church. It's that you are there as a pastor to help people understand what ministry is so that they can go be the ministers. But you can't do that the first month. You can't do that the first year, I don't think. You can't. There's so much tradition in churches it's not going to change because you're there. It will not change. Let's just say that I had to leave because of my health at some time, and Chris became the pastor of our church. He's been there for 26 years. He's been there for 26 years. He knows as much about the culture of our church as anybody. You know, next to my wife and Tracy, he probably knows as much about it. He wasn't saved for about 5 years, and grumbled for being there and didn't learn much. But he got saved. You know, she'd have to drag him in the back door. And but I'm just saying that he knows the church knows him. The church knows him. And he knows the culture of the church and what it's like and what its expectations are and what its leadership model is and all of those kind of things. It's very rare that you're going to enter into that kind of situation. Just trust me. We're talking rare. Rare. You're going to probably go to a church where you have to hand in a resume. You don't know anybody there. They don't know anything about you. You cannot just go in there like gangbusters. They have to have a way to measure you that fuels their confidence and their trust in you. And you have to exercise some self-control about what it is that they want you to do, right? So I don't have any problem with what I read. I thought to myself, I said, this is really pretty good. This is really pretty good. It covers most of the bases. It's a little legalistic in some areas, but if I'm looking for a church, at least they have taken the time to tell me what their expectations were of me before I take the job. If you owned a business and you were investing in somebody and paying for their insurance and paying their salary and giving them a car to drive or whatever it was, you have some expectations, and they're going to tell you what those expectations are before you ever get in that car and they sign you up for insurance. They want you to know, these are my expectations, and we want you to work 40 hours a week. Is that unreasonable, yes or no? No. That's the way it ought to be. We want you to make so many insurance visits in a week. Is that okay? Yep, that's perfectly good. It's perfectly fine. So, I think that you've just got to, I'm just saying that if you enter into the ministry, nobody knows what you are yet. They don't know who you are. They don't know much about you at all, unless you've been at a church for a long time. Now, you two men have been at this church here for a long time, 6, 8 years, or however long it's been at least.
I've been about 6 years now, I think.
Yeah. So you probably, whether or not they accept you or go and get somebody else, it's okay if they do. It's perfectly okay. You're going to have to accept God's will and move on to where God really wants you, right? He's got something better for you. I would see it that way. So here's what you're going to find when you go to a church, that your church is probably going to want to give you more help than you think that you actually need. They are. They're going to have a lot of input into and where does that input come in? Where does that input happen? Somebody tell me. What's the famous meeting for that to happen? The deacons meeting. Right? Do you go to deacons meetings? Do they tell you what they will? Some do, some don't.
We got a pretty good.
Pastor, leadership team. Good. Every pastor's got to be a good leader.
We spend most of our time for you.
Good. That's even better. It's not a team that you want to be on.
That's right.
But it's not true in every.
That's right.
It's not true. If you have a Wednesday
And that's
night.
always been true at our church either.
Well, if you have a Wednesday night prayer meeting, most churches hardly anybody ever comes. That's how much they value praying. So they realize that this is your first church or your first ministry venue, so their level of confidence in you is very low. I'm just telling you, it's very low. You may think it's very high because you're a great guy, but it's not. Nobody has confidence in a young pastor that's on his first church, nor should they. Nor should they have a lot of confidence. So it doesn't matter how seasoned, I think even the seasoned servant leaders find themselves in conflicts and differences with others, that they have to exercise some self-control, that they don't just start reacting to the difficult things that are going to take place. I've often heard it said, you've heard it said many times, that the ministry is not for the faint of heart. That's an understatement. That's really an understatement of what. And I think that should be heeded by anybody that's going into ministry. Okay, any questions before we close out this class and start the next one? All right. Chris, you want to pray for us as we close?
Sure. Lord, we thank you for all the lessons we've learned here tonight. We thank you for this experience, for your word, where all this is based on. We want to bring honor and glory to you with our lives, with our future ministries, and so on, whether at church and at home. We ask that you let all this sink in and work on us, improve us, build us to where you'd have us be. Let it guide us in our future paths, wherever that will have us go, and get us to where you want us to be. We ask that you be with us throughout the rest of the evening here. Let the next class just speak well to our hearts. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Yeah. Well, I got that off.
You got anybody down in your church trying to get their CDL for the church bus?
If you can push the button, the red button on top there, I'll reach it. Just as soon as I can.
A big circle.
Yeah, that's it.
Right.